This is the regular session, and I'd like to call it to order. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll? I think I said it was Wednesday. I guess I'm not with it. This is Tuesday, January 18th. And so this is the regular meeting of the Plan Commission. Mr. Wilson, if you'd call the roll, that would be delightful.
Right. Okay, I'm here. Just a second.
Okay.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes, I'm here.
Ryan Randolph.
Here.
Bernie Garritas.
Here.
Jeff McKim.
Here.
The Owens. Jerry Pittsford.
Yeah.
Jim Steenbrook.
Here.
Julie Thomas, I believe, is absent. Amy Thompson.
Here.
Okay. Was Jerry Pittsford here?
Not yet.
Okay. And Dee Owens was not here, correct?
No, she's on an airplane flight, I think, coming back.
Okay. Want to verify.
Yeah.
We have 7 members and a quorum.
Okay, wonderful. Well, if you would be so kind as to introduce the evidence.
I request that the following items be introduced as evidence for tonight's hearing. Monroe County Comprehensive Plan is adopted and amended. Monroe County Zoning Ordinance is adopted and amended. Monroe County Subdivision Ordinance is adopted and amended. The rules of procedure of the Monroe County Plan Commission, and the case is advertised and docketed for hearing on tonight's agenda.
Is there a motion to approve? Okay.
So motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll on the admission of the evidence. Irene Randolph.
Yes. And is my audio coming through?
Yes.
Yes.
Bernie Garritas.
Yes.
Jeff McKim.
Yes.
Jim Steenbrook.
Yes.
Amy Thompson.
Yes.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes.
And I was incorrect. There are 6 members, not 7 present. So I will correct the attendance. It's still a quorum.
Okay, great. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Voters on the motion to approve tonight's agenda as advertised. Again, a favorable vote is to approve the agenda. Bernie Garritas.
Yes.
Jeff McKim.
Yes.
Jim Steenbrook.
Yes.
Amy Thompson.
Yes.
Margaret Clemens.
Yes.
Irene Randolph.
Yes.
The agenda is approved by a 6-0 vote.
Well, there's no administrative business tonight, so we'll move directly on to the unfinished business. And the first item on the agenda is PUO-21-1, P&G Planned Unit Outline Plan to rezone property from PB to PUD. And this is the final hearing concerning a parcel located at 5100 West Victor Pike. Ms. Crecelius, if you would be so kind as to discuss the case with us and present it.
I'm going to cover tonight for Ann, Margaret.
Okay.
So as you stated, this is a plan unit outline plan to establish a PUD zone on the parcel at 5100 Victor Pike. This is the final hearing of this, and I'm just going to go through it since it's been a little bit of time since we last heard. So a quick summary of this petition. It's 4.9 acres. Mr. Carmen has his hand raised. I'm not sure if we want to recognize him right away.
Well, it's unusual, but Mr. Carmen usually has his hand raised for a purpose. So Mr. Carmen, would you please, could technical staff please unmute Mr. Carmen?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Mr. Carmen.
Yeah, before Jackie got into a full presentation of what had been mentioned at the admin committee, I wanted to go ahead and do that now. The petitioner would ask that the Plan Commission table this petition, that we do not have a right to continue automatically. continuance would be to any event to a date certain. There's another legal issue that some of you are aware of that we're still looking at. I'd like to get a final answer on that. That is the historic use of property, whether it allowed truck parking or not, and would ask the Plan Commission to consider tabling this. If you would table it, we understand that would require that at a later time, if we asked to have it back on the agenda, that would require formal notice to neighbors and publication just as a new petition. So before we go any further and spend time on it, I would ask you to consider tabling this petition.
Thank you, Mr. Carmen. Mr. Enright Randolph?
Yes, I guess it's a procedure question. If we wish to entertain that, how far do we have to entertain this petition now that it was, moved forward? Do we need to listen to the staff report and petitioner's report and public comment, or would we be able to table this more immediately and move it forward?
Mr. Schilling or Larry, would you please advise?
Yeah, you could table this at this point without taking any additional testimony.
And if you would indulge me, Madam President, I would like to do that exact thing and move PUD-21-1 P&G plan unit outline plan to rezone property from PB to PUD final hearing.
I see Mr. Garitas has his hand raised.
Yeah, I would support that. What Tron said. My only question is there a finite time limit if we table it? Does it stay active for the petitioner to request it to be heard then within 12 months, within 18 months? I just don't know the answer to that question.
Bernie, Dave can hop in on this too. I don't think there's any time limitation. There would just be a request to place it back on the agenda. Since we're not continuing it to a specific meeting, we would have to re-advertise anyway in regard.
Okay, I'll second Tron's motion.
Well, I would like to, if you would indulge me, Mr. Carmen, do you see a date in the near future that would be more practical that maybe we could ask to table it to?
I can't be certain of that because it does involve a court proceeding, and I can't control that. But my best guess is the 16th.
You have a great planning staff, and I think they can work with you offline to make sure you get back on the agenda. But if you had a particular date in mind, I was willing to amend my motion for that. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. If I may make an additional comment on that, I believe, and Larry or Dave could confirm, I believe if you table it, you as a commission could always ask to put it back on the agenda. Since it's still an open petition, we still have the duty to do notice, but you could put it back on if you think the time's running that you want it resolved one way or the other, and we're not yet ready, you can still put it on anyway. Perfect. I'm going to leave my motion as is. Then.
Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Do we have a motion to table it in a second?
Yes. Tron moved and Bernie seconded.
Okay. The motion is continue the P&G petition for a plan unit development outline plan approval generally. A vote in favor is a vote to continue the matter generally. Bernie Garitas?
Yes.
Jeff McKim?
Yes.
Jim Stainbrook?
Yes.
Amy Thompson?
Yes.
Barbara Clemens?
Yes.
Ron Randolph?
Yes.
The vote is 6-0 to continue the matter generally.
And so to the members of the public who came to testify for this particular case, I would like to let you know that when this comes before the Plan Commission again, it will be advertised. We're sorry for any inconvenience, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts at the time when and if it comes before the Plan Commission at the next hearing. Please let the record reflect that Mr. Pittsford has arrived, Mr. Jerry Pittsford. Hello. Okay, so we're moving on now to unfinished business item number 3, REZ-21-7, 440 East Sample Road, a rezone from Ag RR to general business. And this is the final hearing concerning a property in Washington Township. Mr. Myers, is Mr. Myers here today, Jackie? Okay.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, this is REZ-21-7, the 440 East Sample Road rezone. This is the final hearing. We had a preliminary hearing last month for this petition. So let me get to it, and we can go over some brief summary, and then we can also look at some of the new exhibits that have come about since the last time we've heard this. All right, so just a brief summary. The petition site is 1.647 acres, and the petition request is to rezone from agricultural rural reserve to general business. The petition site is 440 East Sample Road, and the use of the lot will become a grocery store as determined by use determination, and more specifically, it will be for a Dollar General store. Dollar General as a grocery store is only permitted in the general business zoning district. So we have the definition here for grocery store. And overall, if the rezone is approved, the petitioner must submit a commercial site plan for review by planning staff, and all applicable site plan requirements, including but not limited to grading, parking, lighting, and signage, must be met by the proposed development. A little bit of a recap of the previous committee meetings here as well. The Plan Review Committee, which met on November 10th, voted to forward this petition to the Plan Commission with a negative recommendation, and that vote was 4-0, citing that the petition was not compatible with the Monroe County Comprehensive Plan. And then the last Plan Commission meeting, the preliminary hearing, which was on December 14th, 2021, there was no vote on this petition during that meeting, hence the meeting tonight. But there were some questions and some information requested by Plan Commission members. One of those was for planning staff to prepare an exhibit about the location of grocery stores and convenience stores nearby to the proposed location. That is Exhibit 5 in the staff report, and I also included those here in this presentation. And then also there was a request by the Plan Commission for the petitioner to provide a list of proposed items to be sold in the Dollar General store. And that is Exhibit 6 in your staff report. It is a link. It's a rather large PDF document that has a full list of items that they expect will be sold at the Dollar General. And so if you have any questions about some of those items, we can ask petitioner's representative this evening, but I did not include it in this presentation as it's a very lengthy document, and it would just be just a lot of slides to get all of that material covered. So here's the location map, Sample Road, I-69 off to the west. Some more maps here. We have the current zoning map, Agricultural Rural Reserve. As we've had some communication and conversation last time we met, there is this limited business zoning district area to the west. Many of these parcels, however, are owned by the state as they were taken up during the I-69 expansion. And we have over here on the right side of your screen, the comprehensive plan map is designated as rural residential. Here we have some department comments. They're basically talking about aspects of the proposed site plan that was submitted. So we can come back to these if we want, but generally the item in today's conversation is for the rezone specifically. Some aerial pictometry here. And then some street view images of the petition site as well. Here we have the letter to the Plan Commission. It will be a approximately 10,600 square foot building for commercial use as a Dollar General. But like I said before, first they have to have the appropriate zoning for this use to be permitted. Here we have the submitted site plan. It might be a little hard to see, so I have it zoomed in a little bit more here. And if we have any questions about this, I'm sure we can ask the petitioner. And if you have any questions about the standards that need to be met, staff can answer those questions for you. All right, here is the first new exhibit that was prepared. The blue icon here, that is the petition site for the Dollar General. And this map is basically a Google Maps search for grocery stores. So these are all the little places that came up from Google Maps when you search grocery stores nearby. There's some places up here, Dollar General, and then there's some, of course, some Circle K's along West 46, another Dollar General over there, and then just some other interesting locations that were considered grocery stores throughout this area of the county. And then the second exhibit was a search for convenience stores. As you'll note, there's a little bit different items came up for this one, but also some similar ones, and we can come back and review these when we would like. And I just got a notification that my internet is unstable, so I'm going to turn off my video. Okay, so now we're at the staff recommendation. Planning staff's recommendation to the Plan Commission is to deny the request to rezone the property from agricultural rural reserve to general business based on the findings of fact, specifically findings A, B, C, and E. And then the Plan Review Committee, like I stated before, had also voted to forward this petition with a negative recommendation. I will now take any questions.
Okay, do any members of the Plan Commission have questions for Mr. Myers? Okay, I don't see any. Is the petitioner or the petitioner's representative here? And would you please be recognized, and could staff unmute them?
Yes, please, for the record.
Yes, Mr. Kraft.
Yes, John Kraft with the law firm of Young, Lind, Indris and Kraft, 126 West Spring Street in New Albany, appearing on behalf of the petitioner. Along with me is Will McDonough. He is with Paul Primavera and Associates. He is the engineer on the project, and certainly we would outline primarily those considerations that staff has outlined with regards to Indiana Code 3674603. Under those 5 considerations dealing with the comprehensive plan, one of the elements I think is important to look at in this regard, and it even occurred in some of the discussions with the Plan Commission and likewise with the committee. The comprehensive plan in this instance has some age to it. It doesn't take into consideration the I-69 taking. It doesn't take into consideration the appropriations by the state when it condemned those properties that previously were occupied by businesses. The comprehensive plan is only a guide. It's not an ordinance. And certainly from the standpoint, it is only a consideration under Indiana Code 3674603. Without it taking into consideration I-69, I think it's either one, a time to look at this on its own, look at it and give consideration to the comprehensive plan, but likewise, while giving consideration to it, it should not be dispositive of it based upon the fact that it is, again, outdated. The second would be the current conditions and character of current structures in that district. While it indicates under the staff report that see the findings under Section A, once again, these are separate and distinct. The general business district is a requirement based upon a zoning determination. It is going to be a Dollar General, and certainly this evening is merely the issue of use. Certainly the issue of a development plan would come back to be reviewed. My client did submit a proposed plan, primarily just to give you an idea how this would sit on the property. And I think when we look at the current conditions, one of those conditions tends to be when the taking took place for I-69, The roadway, and on your screen right now, I think it's important to look at the frontage piece of that. The road does not taper down until after it passes right at the end of the frontage for this parcel. So again, when looking at current conditions, I believe this is given an anticipation of some use other than what it is currently used for. When we look at also under that determination, there was a conclusion that there were not sewers. There is nothing in your zoning ordinance that requires sewers. And I've gone from it frontwards, backwards, and can't find anything that specifically addresses sewers. Mr. McDonough at a later point in time will discuss the issue of septic if the question is asked, but it will accommodate, due to its size and due to the usage, it will accommodate a septic system on site. Then we look at the most desirable use for land in each district. Again, if it weren't for the appropriation, this might not be a use, but when the state took what it did for the I-69 corridor, took out some of those businesses, this tends to be a desirable use. And again, while you don't have adjacent properties immediately contiguous or adjacent to this, as noted by the staff report, there are commercial uses in close proximity to this property. The conservation of property values, once again, we addressed this previously when we tried to look at the issues. It is apparent that the issue of the use is not going to have a negative effect. In fact, when looking at this site, there were other sites that were hoping in close proximity that this would be approved because they believe, other owners in close proximity, believe that their property values will in fact increase based upon this particular use. The next one primarily deals with responsible development and growth. Once again, I think when we look at the fact that the roadway was widened when the appropriation took place, you have a wider road almost all the way to the end of the frontage on this property. And certainly, perhaps, and again, it's just speculation on my part, perhaps that was what was intended when that roadway was taken to the extent that it is. When we look specifically at the determination, and again, the conclusion in that finding, once again, the staff points to sewers. There is nothing, again, in your ordinance that would require this to be on sewers. And certainly from the standpoint, what Mr. McDonough will cover is the fact that a commercial system could adequately fit on this property for purposes of servicing that. When we look at Indiana Code 3674603 and the 5 considerations, we would certainly request that the use, the zoning change, if you will, be granted this evening, and then certainly the recommendation would go to the county commissioners for their final determination. I'll take any questions you may have of me. Mr. McDonough may follow me. I'm at a different location getting ready for another zoning hearing in Sellersburg, Indiana, but Mr. McDonough will speak to the issues that I raised.
Okay. Do members of the Plan Commission have any questions for Mr. Kraft before we turn briefly to Mr. McDonough? Mr. Enright Randolph and then Mr. Pittsford.
I guess my question is pretty self-explanatory to me, but he alluded to that, you know, our comprehensive plan is outdated and a couple other things are outdated. And I was wondering if he wanted to kind of drill into that just a bit more for, you know, maybe the public's edification and maybe for some ideas or thoughts that maybe us as a Plan Commission have not thought through.
Certainly, I would be more than happy to address it, Madam President.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Kraft, please feel free. And then we'll proceed to Mr. Pittsford.
Thank you. As I indicated, the comprehensive plan, as most of you as members of the Plan Commission are aware, is merely a guide with respect to the county's plan as to development. The current plan is approximately 9.5, 10 years old. It did not take into consideration, or at least when you review it from front to back, there is nothing within the body of it that addresses the I-69 corridor. And the result of that tends to be many times comprehensive plans are adopted, and they're adopted with the foresight of what may happen. And in this instance, while it may have happened, it is not addressed in the comprehensive plan. And since the comprehensive plan is just that, it's a plan, it's not an ordinance, it is merely a guide to the county as to where growth may take place. When the I-69 corridor came through and part of the property along the 69 corridor was condemned or taken by way of appropriation, what ultimately happened was a business, not comparable to this, but some of the businesses along that corridor now are owned by the state of Indiana as a result of that appropriation. The result tends to be they removed this, and by removing this, it changed what I would believe would be the plan, perhaps even the foresight of the county to re-look at the comprehensive plan to bring it in line with what has occurred with I-69. And again, it's merely a plan. It's not something that is carved in stone that says we have to follow it. Indiana Code 3674603 specifically indicates it is a consideration in making a decision on a rezoning. And by virtue of the fact that it is only a consideration, one of those considerations should be looking to the possibility of saying, this is something we need to review, that we need to look at, and perhaps work upon a new comprehensive plan that takes into consideration I-69.
Thank you. That really answered my question, but I was curious if there was anything else that jumped out of your review of the comprehensive plan outside of the development of the interstate that might be significant enough to mention.
One of the items that I think is important, and it was brought up by staff in several of the considerations, dealt with sewers aren't available, so it doesn't comply with the comprehensive plan. I found nothing in the zoning ordinance, nor within the comprehensive plan specifically that addressed that this would have to be on septic, or have to be on sewers, excuse me. And as a result of that, I tend to believe that if there is going to be something examined in the comprehensive plan, or even perhaps in an amendment to your ordinance, I think we have to look at the fact that there's nothing in there that would require a commercial use such as this when the property and the size of the property can accommodate a septic system, why it can't go forward in that regard. So that may be a consideration as well when reviewing the comprehensive plan as well as the zoning ordinance.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kraft. And Mr. Pittsford.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to begin with an observation off of Mr. Kraft's last remark, because I was a significant participant in the current plan, comprehensive plan that we have. And I would point out that his last comment was really instructive, because if sewering is required in this area for any kind of general business or other kind of intense use development, it's a pretty high hurdle. There's a lot of stone. There's a lot of difference in height, elevation to overcome. And that's something that we actually did talk about at that time. And there was a conversation in the city of Bloomington on how they were going to get there. But that's a whole nother kettle of fish, and I'm just going to leave it right there. But he was very apt in making that observation. I also want to throw out a question to be answered later by Mrs. Ridge regarding how convincing the argument of the width of the roadway post I-69 taking should be considered. I think that is a significant question. It's one that I've had myself. So how convincing of an argument is that? I think we see sometimes even within the urban area of Monroe County, much more intense use on much more narrow streets. So if we have an appropriate time later, I'd like to hear on that. So now to my questions for Mr. Kraft. First of all, was this property taken during the I-69 construction, this particular lot?
No, it was not.
Okay, so it has continued in private ownership.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And it was previously open ground. There was no residential structure.
I believe there is a structure on it, and that's shown in one of the exhibits to the staff's report.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been a while since I looked at it, so my apologies. Right. Very small structure for the size of the property, I would think. Anyway, the next question I have, Mr. Kraft, do you think there is a negative bias against the Dollar General brand?
That I would say that I've represented Dollar General in front of some other municipalities and other counties. Recently took a case to the Indiana Court of Appeals on this very issue on Dollar General. And certainly I'm happy to say that we prevailed with the Indiana Court of Appeals, and that Dollar General store is now in Floyd Knobs, Indiana. So I think at some point in listening to the folks at that zoning meeting, there may be some negative bias as it relates to Dollar General. But if you've been in one, and I believe that one of the members of the Plan Commission says that he's been in one, I think when you look at it overall, it is a store that is very much like the old general store. And certainly I've seen that where the one we did in Floyd County, all the folks, I shouldn't say all, excuse me, a majority of the folks that were there to oppose it, now they're some of the best customers.
Okay, two last questions that kind of go together. What is the extent to which families in that area would be able to pick up basic groceries, milk, butter, eggs, bread, you know, those, oh my gosh, I don't want to drive all the way back to town. I'll just run down to Dollar General. To what extent would those items be available? And what would the distance of travel be if there was not a Dollar General in this location for those families? And with that, I conclude my questions.
I'm sorry. I can answer the one as it relates to the one item that Mr. Meyer indicated that was not attached because of the PDF. All of those items you mentioned as to what a family may be able to go and obtain at the Dollar General, all of those items are available. And the list is massive as to what will be available in that store. And certainly I will let Mr. McDonough address the other portion of that question. But as it relates to distance, he's the one that did the calculations on the distance of the other stores based upon what was provided by staff. Based upon that, I'll let him address that. But all of those items you indicated would be readily available at that Dollar General.
Mr. Pittsford, do we still have you? Oh, you're muted, Mr. Pittsford.
Yes, I'm here. No, he's answered my questions.
Okay.
I'm content. You may move on.
Okay, thank you. I'd like, since you did raise a question, I'd like to refer now to Mr. Satterley to answer the question about the road width inquiry that you made during your question to Mr. Kraft. Mr. Satterley, if you're here, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, what's the specific question about the road width?
It was the suitability of the road width for this purpose and for perhaps other purposes.
Also, if it was intentionally, wait, real quickly, if it was intentionally designed that way with the idea that a general business or some other commercial use may extend to that point.
Now, the road, actually, that's an active project. Our sample road improvement project is going to go between I-69 and Old State Road 37 to the east. And that section will tie into a improved 2-lane section to the east that'll have 12-foot lanes, paved shoulders, and improved drainage throughout all the way over to Old State Road 37.
Okay, does that...
That's a pretty significant distance, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know, 1.5 miles or so, 2 miles maybe. That construction will be starting in March of this year.
Well, I would say in this area that in terms of reaching residential areas, that represents a significant factor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pittsford. Mr. McKim and then Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Paul, Mr. Satterley just kind of addressed the issue that I wanted to get at. I was kind of surprised that it hadn't been mentioned that the county is actively involved in widening and improving that sample road right now, and that taper that the petitioner referred to probably won't exist and by the time that this project is done. And I think that is just another example of how this area probably, the comprehensive plan probably is showing its age with respect to the kind of the sample road corridor. This is something that, I mean, it's the northernmost full interchange on I-69, and the county is putting significant, and the state significant resources into improving sample road to be able to take advantage of that. And that's certainly, like Jerry mentioned, quite substantial just for rural residential area.
Thank you, Mr. McKim. Mr. Wilson?
Madam President, I was having audio issues and I couldn't catch the last of Paul Satterley's statement as far as which direction they were planning to improve on the infrastructure of Sample Road. If I could, both. Okay, thank you. I thought that was really relevant to the discussion. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. Randolph. Yeah.
Sample Road's going to be improved all the way from Old State Road 37, past I-69, and all the way west to Bottom Road along Simpson Chapel. Awesome. That's all going to start in March of this year.
Okay, Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it's not quite accurate to say that the comprehensive plan did not address I-69. There's a separate Indiana 37 I-69 corridor study that is very detailed and addresses all the proposed intersections and interchanges along the proposed route. I can't give you the exact date, probably 2009. Again, it's somewhat dated now after construction, but it did really go into detail, and it's incorporated into the comprehensive plan along with all the other studies we've done, such as the urbanizing area plan, the rural zoning plan, and so on. So there is a fairly detailed study that set forth the guidelines for the county in regard to this corridor. Again, whether it needs to be updated or not is another question.
Thank you,
Madam President. I want to interject, please.
Yes. Yes,
and you can rule me out of order and I'll shut up. But I don't think that's a fair representation, because there was a very clear effort to limit anything along I-69, because there were many people on the Plan Commission who resisted it. And that property down on Victor Olytic Road, where 37 and 69 come together, is a perfect example of how many people involved with the Plan Commission at that time wanted to stymie any efforts of development along this interstate. So I don't think that is really fully clear. And I don't want to get too jacked up about it, but yeah, it's in there, but I think there definitely was an effort to limit that.
Well, I wasn't saying that. Yeah, there is a plan, is all I'm saying. Whether or not it's the correct plan or needs to be updated is another question. And
my point exactly.
Yeah, I agree that it was very against any development on the interchanges for I-69 for a number of reasons. Primarily, I mean, the stated reasons I recall was the lack of infrastructure and the lack of available services such as police protection and so on for some of these areas. And again, I don't want to try to paraphrase the entire report. Probably would be a great time to look at, particularly for the area that's to the north on I-69, where we haven't done studies, that we might want to do a sort of mini interchange study for that area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Stainbrook?
Well, having listened to everyone and continuing to do so, I think that this grocery / convenience store, I think the convenience store would be just that in line with Jerry's, Mr. Pittsford's questions and some of the comments that were derived from that. I don't suppose I'm the only one to patronize Dollar General in Judah, but we find it a real convenience. And again, thinking in the context of some of Jerry's comments, someone could live a long time. Well, I don't want to get in trouble with the Bloomington merchants. I best be careful. But with the convenience of this grocery convenience store, someone could live there, Jerry, and do quite nicely aside from procuring milk and orange juice. I'm very favorably impressed with Mr. Kraft's comments. And then as I listen to all the comments, I think this would be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stainbrook. And I would just like to make a comment because we are talking about just one of the conditions about the property, and that has to do with its appropriateness with consideration to the comprehensive plan. And I think that we have an obligation to consider the most desirable use for the land in this district for which it is adapted. And I see myself that Dollar General, even though I like Dollar General and I go to Dollar General myself, I don't see, I'm not convinced of its appropriateness in this area, given the surrounding properties. And even with the improvements, I believe that the residents have stated very vociferously over the last several months that they would like to keep the rural. And this flies in the face of what the people want. And so I find that it may not be, and in my opinion, is not the most desirable use for which the land in this district is adapted. And I'm also not convinced that this is responsible growth and development. So that being said, I'd like to turn it to Mr. McDonough, if he is here, to have a few minutes to speak, because we've already indulged the petitioner and the petitioner's representative for some time. So if you're here, would you please unmute yourself? And if you have a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, or, you know, try to keep in mind that Mr. Kraft has spoken. So,
yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. My name is Will McDonough, and I'm happy to answer your questions, Madam President. I'd just like to say thank you all for attending tonight and considering this site. I believe what Mr. Kraft had said really does highlight this property as a piece that could be used as commercial. When you look at the slide that Drew has added that shows all the convenience and grocery stores from this area, from Wayport, I believe is represented there kind of in the center of that map. The closest would be the New Ground Farm LLC, which is kind of to the diagonal bottom right. That's like 5.4 miles away. Then you start to look at what's to the immediate east of this over in the Nashville area. That's 12.3 miles. And then even to the northwest towards Paragon. In fact, I actually represented Dollar General in that case. That's there at, I believe it's 12.4 miles away. So I think this would be great for the area. I think that with the addition of the septic field, any and all sanitary sewer questions could be answered. We've left a portion in the behind the building of about 6,000 square feet ready for a septic. And in this instance, for these stores, they only generate 600 gallons per day, which typically is taken care of with a 400 square foot septic system. So I don't have any reluctancy of having a septic designed for this particular site, for this particular use. Now, with the question of whether it's needs to remain residential rural, within 300 feet of this is where the takings occurred for the NDOT project there where they've added the roundabouts. Now that was about 5.5 acres that they have taken away that used to be commercial and now left void as a Indiana Department of Transportation property. This is right there in this corridor, I feel, and I understand if this were a mile down the road, that could be an understanding of something that we would not want to do as far as residential properties. But in this instance, I believe this is appropriate in the location.
Okay, Mr. Garatas?
Yeah, I've just got a quick question. I'll have some other questions later when we're just discussing amongst ourselves here. But Mr. McDonough, on the septic system, is that a State Board of Health permit and that you go through for that?
Yes, sir. So typically we'll have the ground Perk test is what they used to call it, but it's a soil scientist takes readings from the ground. We submit those to the Indiana State Department of Health. They tell us basically from the findings of the soil what the load rates will be. With that information, then we will design the system to accommodate those, send it back to the state for their review. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes then the state will decide whether they'll let the local, which would be the Monroe County Health Department, to review and to approve. But most likely it would be the state that would approve. Either way, it would have to go through an approval process and have an approval.
I don't want to eat up time here. You've answered my question. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
The other question I've got, so inside the building, I'm assuming outside the building, you'll have a hose bed, that type of thing. But on the inside of the building, you have men and women's restroom and maybe some sort of utility sink, or what's the plumbing in the building? And you may not be able to answer it at this early stage. I don't know, but I'm just curious if you know and if you could share that with us.
Sure, it's very minimal. You do have a men's single unit bathroom and also a women's single unit bathroom. And alongside of that, on the outside of those two rooms, you have a water fountain. And then there is one mop sink that's in the back, and that's all the water usage that portrays to the building. Now there is some sprinkled systems for irrigation, but of course that doesn't go through the sewer.
Okay, thank you. Are you finished, Mr. Garatas?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Hey, quick question on water. Sorry. Is there fire suppression involved in the design?
No, sir. This building is 10,640 square feet. So the state has a general rule that it has to be over 12,000 square feet. So the site would just take use of any fire hydrants that are in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Enright Randolph?
Yes, and I was hoping I'd be a little more prepared for this question. You alluded to the taking for I-69, and would you repeat how many acres that you indicated that was part of that taking?
Yes, it was over 5.5 acres. I'm just saying that the lot in particular that fits around, it's kind of between, maybe Drew could pull that back up.
No, that's perfect. I got to follow up with Drew. Sorry for jumping in front.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But frame these questions. So I have a couple of follow-ups if you would indulge me. So from what I'm understanding from the taking, that there's 3 parcels in total. A lot of them don't really have too much descriptive ways to describe them, like a 18-digit parcel number or even an address location. But there are a few that have one. From what my review here is, there's one parcel that has the calculated acreage, which is just a calculation. It's not the legal description of 3.1 acres. Then there is another one that does have a 18-digit parcel. It's 100 East Sample. It's just north of where the gas station. That calculated acreage was 8.12 acres. And then there was a third one that is actually kind of within the right-of-way that is now part of the state. or at least at one point, it has the zoning designation. Let me make sure I'm very clear. The way I'm looking at this is the current light business zoning and what is now part of the state of Indiana as property. So the third one I saw was 4.24 acres calculated. So some really rough math here. You got 11, 15, like 15 and some change acres that was part of the taking for I-69. So I just wanted to really kind of make sure that we were clear, and that some parcels are around 5 acres like you're alluding to, but I think the grand scheme of things here is that about 15 acres was acquired for I-69 in that light business area that is currently zoned. And now the real question is it appropriate for us to think outside of the context of the comprehensive plan? I thought our Madam President brought up a great question. Is this the best use for that property? And that puts the Plan Commission in a very tricky situation. And I think we could speak and expand, and I have a few more comments once we get past the public duration of this petition.
Thank you, Mr. Enright Randolph. Mr. Stainbrook?
Thank you, Madam President, Margaret. I'd like to use, and I'll try to be succinct with an anecdotal incident that may at first seem unrelated, but all of you will remember, I'm sure, when President Nixon was faced with a fuel crisis in the country, the Nixon administration lowered the speed limit to 55 every place, including interstates. Now, not too many people adhered to that 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, including law enforcement as you went down the interstates. The point here that might apply better in other instances is that if you limit and regulate without enforcement, there is this tendency for people to ignore extreme regulation without enforcement. And I think that may have been the difficulty in different places for sympathy with our decisions. But in this case then, and so help me, and I may be wrong, and Commissioner Thomas will maybe call me to the office for a good spanking. I haven't had a good spanking since grade school, and that's been a while back. But anyway, it's my contention that I came up with this, keep the rural rural and the urban urban. And that later became, I think, a campaign slogan. And I believe Margaret admirably and cited that in a much better way that I can. But if we take every area and say that it's rural, I think in this instance, for example, we're going to have more difficulty saying rural in other areas. With the introduction of 69, whether it's been duly considered or considered as all, as one of us think, and others may think it should have been given more consideration or brought to date. And that's an aside on my part. And I shouldn't take advantage, Margaret, of your recognition. I'm just saying that I'm all for keeping rural, but if you're too strict, and here's another thing with this kind of thing. I don't believe Dollar General would do this. I hope no one would do it. But I've had one of our own counselors on occasion say, you know, Jim, this enforcement's tough. You know, Jim, if people lie, it's really hard. Well, my answer to that was, if a guy comes out of the bank with a gun in his hand and he tells you I didn't do it, I guess it's all over because he lied. So I think I do agree a little bit with that thought in the case of this. We've got people here with a good plan, a good product with service. The truck service, it wasn't a truck stop and it was service for anyone, but some of the trucks did frequent the service station that was appropriated by the state. So this is on such a smaller scale. Well, I've overtalked this thing. But as I said before, by golly, I've talked Bernie right out. He's going to leave. I'm all for this, and I hope we'll look at this again with an open mind when we vote. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Steinbrook. Mr. Enright Randolph?
Yes, and it's just real quick. I just want to clarify. I said light business several times, and I meant limited business. Just if anyone was looking into that, just wanted to make sure that I corrected myself.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We turn now to the public. And if there are members of the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition, would you please either raise your hand or press *9 on your phone so that we know that you would like to speak? And Jackie, I don't know if I can see the participants with their hands raised.
I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
Okay. Are there members of the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? And if so, would you please raise your hand or press *9 on your telephone? Okay, there's a telephone number.
We have a caller.
Yes, I do recognize that. If tech support could unmute the caller, or does the caller press *6?
I believe it's *6.
Yeah, so if the caller with the telephone number ending in 4117 would please press *6, I believe you'll be unmuted. Okay, would you please introduce yourself and state your name?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jason Lozelle. I live over on Shiloh Road, and which is a little ways from Sample, but not too far. My only thing about that Dollar General thing concerning me about it is this is my thing about it. It's such a rural area out here that I just don't know if it would. There's not enough houses are scattered out so bad that I don't know if it'd benefit having a Dollar General put right there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? If so, please raise your hand or press *9 on your telephone. If you see anyone, tech support or Jackie, please let me know.
Madam President, this is Plan Commissioner Tron Enright Randolph, and I was just booted off. Well, now I'm back on. And I wasn't able to listen to the public comment, and that's unfortunate since we only had one person speak. I was really interested in what they had to say. If you could summarize or allow them.
A gentleman called in to say that he lives out there and he doesn't think the area would benefit from a Dollar General, that it's very rural, and that he does not believe that it would be beneficial. Did I state that correctly, sir?
Yeah, you did. And my point about that is, there's a Dollar General. They put one in Bean Blossom, and they also put one in. They're building a new one over towards Spencer, which is coming this way too, also. And I just don't see with so many. And then we got Lakeside IGA right here in Unionville too, which is not too far from Sample Road. I just don't see where it'd be beneficial for us out in a rural area like this.
Thank you so much, Sir. Thank you. Okay, well, we come back to the members of the Plan Commission, and also Mr. McDonough. You have a few minutes to rebut anything that was stated, and then we can have a motion and a vote.
Thank you, Madam President, for my time. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where Shiloh Road is, where this gentleman lives in conjunction of this or close proximity of this site. But I will say that many of the grocery stores that are represented on this block here, like I said, the closest one, and I'm not even sure what kind of grocery store it would be the New Ground Farm at 5.4 miles. Everything else is 8.3, 6.8. 9.6, 10.1, 12.3, and 12.4. Just to make sure we understand the proximity of these other businesses.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there a motion from any member of the Plan Commission?
Margaret, I've got
bring this back for a discussion. Sorry, Bernie. I think.
Yes, Bernie. Mr. Garitas.
Yeah, actually, I think Jeff had his hand up. I just kind of wanted to put through some observations, but I didn't want to do it before the public had a chance to go through their comments. So Jeff, go ahead if you've got.
Oh, well, I wanted to hear your observations too. I was going to talk about the 37 corridor plan. So I'd rather hear your observations first.
Well, I stay away from the 37 corridor plan because which goes right to my point. If you look along this corridor up through there are a tremendous number of uses that don't hit the rural residential. The tricky thing about the rezone petition is the definition of general business, and the general business is just kind of a catch-all for everything. And that's where the struggle comes in, I think, and probably what staff is seeing, and I respect that greatly. That said, I don't think that this is an area that we would want to look at a PUD for the perils and troubles that we have with those at times. So I think we got multiple uses that are in this corridor that are not consistent with what the rural residential plan is, but they seem to work. I don't go up 69 or back south without and think at these locations that we've got abominations to the public that aren't there and successful and people grow into. I think Jim's point was spot on, and it took me a minute to catch it, but his point that if you have expectations of these areas, and I think the new zoning ordinance is going to cover most of this, hopefully it will, then if you have expectations in an area, then you need to be able to enforce it. And I think that this area is a little bit gray right now because of the businesses that are in this area, because of I-69. And I think in this case, it's a neighborhood serving use that I think there are commercial uses that can be supportive to a rural residential environment. And that's kind of where I see this fit in. And my thoughts with that go along with the observations of this new format or the new store that Dollar General puts in. And I've never been in the one when I've seen it at Bicknell or other places. I've just seen it from the outside. It was just kind of surprising. As far as the septic goes, I know we get hung up on the septic, but oftentimes commercial sites will use and have less impact on on-site sewer systems. You can look at it, the fact that the State Board of Health will be reviewing this along with the Monroe County Health Department. You know, I think that those are two positives. Water usage in a commercial site typically isn't near what you have in a 3-bedroom single-family residential home site. I think the exit at Sample Road to me is an expectation of traffic. And I think that vehicles coming on off that corridor have a destination that's already planned, and having again a neighborhood support store there would be useful. I mean, I don't have a dog in the hunt for Dollar General store or anything else. I just see this as a useful use. And the other question I did have for staff, and I should know this, if the Executive Board of County Commissioners does a rezone on this parcel to general business and a Dollar General store doesn't go there, is there language that accompanies that ordinance, Larry, that pulls it away? Or what kind of commitment goes with the use that we're talking about versus the zoning district that they're asking for? And I'll be quiet. Thanks.
They're basically asking for a map amendment to change the zone lot to general business. Accordingly, any use that's permitted in general business would be allowed there unless some uses were basically that there be a condition that certain uses not be allowed. That would have to be a part of an motion on the part of the Plan Commission. If the commissioners would add a condition at the time it reaches their desk and pass an ordinance with amendments, it would then go back to the Plan Commission for approval with the amendments. If the Plan Commission approved the amendments, the ordinance would go into effect with those amendments. But it's a general rezone, which means anything in general business would be allowed, regardless of the amount of water and sewer, regardless of the intensity of the use and so on. And that's one of the situations we get into with like a rezone petition. That's not just for a particular use. It changes the zone and it runs with the land.
Okay, and so that answers that's where I thought you were going with that. So if we end up with the motion on the table for a recommendation of approval for the Executive Board of County Commissioners, then that might be something that we've got a lot of information here. We're talking specifically about a Dollar General store, so I think that we need to be cognizant of that. And the general business table is pretty expansive with a number of uses. So I will be quiet this time. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Garitas. Mr. McKim?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that Bernie brought that up, because I think that's extremely important for us to keep in the front of our minds. That personally, I'm thinking that a Dollar General is a grocery store is an excellent use for this land, but do we really think that every possible general business use would be appropriate? That's a really good question, and we need to think hard about that. Just when we're talking about the next nearest closest grocery store, that Newground Farm is kind of a red herring. The dot that's next to it is the Lakeside convenience store. It used to be an IGA. It used to actually be a really good grocery store. I mean, it was with a substantial selection of fresh and packaged foods. Now it's totally under new ownership. It's moved to much more of a convenience store with a few grocery items, much more smokes and cokes and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, at one time though, that was a great grocery store for the local residents. I also it's really interesting just glancing over the 37 corridor study here, and we should probably all familiarize ourselves with what that says, because that is incorporated by reference into the comprehensive plan. And it does basically, for this area around Sample Road, it does kind of punt and say, hey, at some point the county may want to have an urban plan, an urban area plan for this with large PUDs. But in the meantime, since we don't have any kind of plan, it should be zoned for rural residential and basically prohibit all businesses. I mean, that is essentially what it says. But that if you then read further, you see that recommendation was predicated on claims that the state did not have any plans for frontage roads out there, and a fear that due to budget issues with I-69, that frontage roads would never even be built. And so, we obviously know that with the benefit of hindsight, that there's a substantial frontage road on both sides. There's substantial frontage roads there with capacity for business. And so I think what that really tells us is that area is ripe for some kind of area plan. We really should move forward with that. Now, where does that leave us right now? That's tough. I think the grocery store is justified, but I'm a little troubled by the idea that it could be anything in general business. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Mr. McKim. Mr. Enright Randolph.
Yes, thank you. And I think a lot of my points are going to be pretty similar. It concerns me to kind of be working outside of the context or the parameters of a comprehensive plan, but it's pretty evident that, with the development of I-69, Monroe County very apprehensive and even really pushed back on the development, and that's fine. My predecessor was a big advocate against the new interstate, and especially going through the virgin land that it did. But we knew it was coming down the pipeline, and we rolled our sleeves up and we got out there and got to work and preserved all the section corners that we could that were going to be disturbed. That went on for years. Years. I mean, if you go to the MPO, we barely get NDOT representatives because we're pretty nasty to them. We didn't work well. I went to a lot of different conferences, and I've heard a lot of people with the Seymour district talk about how well they were able to work with Morgan County. They got a lot of money infused in their community for new road projects. It took us, I think we just now really kind of are still mending that relationship, but it took us a long time to get here. There was plans where we weren't going to have sidewalks on the new 17th bridge, and it was only going to have a pedestrian overpass on the north side of the bridge. They ended up giving us sidewalks on both. But that's because we had to start looking at what was real and what was on the ground and start working, you know, with what infrastructure is out there and what our county needs are. And we got sidewalks on both sides. Heck, we even got a fence built to make sure that there was more safety precautions in place. You look at the petition that was asked to be tabled today. We created a truck stop travel plaza where there's nowhere currently in the entire county that has the parameters to build one by right. You would have to go through a rezone, do a lot adjustment. I mean, we were not wanting I-69 in this community when it was first announced. We need to look at this. Now, am I comfortable with, you know, looking outside of the parameters that I'm asked at these? Not so much. Should we look at this, you know, and see if we should do more of an extensive evaluation of that area instead of just like a one-off? And I absolutely agree we do. And to get to what I wanted to say, and this, Jerry, I'm going to kind of use you, so bear with me. I say we move this forward to see where our commissioners are. I think this is a very real practical use. I don't think just general business is great, but this particular use I think fits very well. But, you know, we forward a lot of things with a favorable recommendation that has been turned down. I think this gives the Plan Commission a sense of how maybe we can move forward a new comprehensive plan that addresses I-69, how we could potentially look at this area as we're going through our rewrite of our zoning ordinance and zoning map, but we need to start doing it now or yesterday. How many people are going to want to come to Monroe County and go through all this every single time? Especially in a very, I think it's all agreed upon that this has the infrastructure for some type of use like this. We just heard from our highway department, they are planning to do even more infrastructure improvement over there. So we need to get our affairs in order so we don't lose opportunities because people don't want to deal with Monroe County. And I know I'm being a little harsh, but I think it needs to be done by now.
Thank you, Mr. Enright Randolph. Mr. Stainbrook?
I appreciate Tron's comments. And I was prepared, Madam President. Margaret, if you were going to call, now this is a question, I have a little more speech to give, but were you ready to call for a motion?
No, because there are still hands raised. Your hand is raised and Amy Thompson's hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you. Because if we were at that point, I was no longer prepared to move a motion to move on this. Jeff really has me thinking, and I believe I ought to actually give Bernie credit for originally troubling me. You know, I thought I had my own thesis, which was to encourage approval of this. And then with these two guys presenting some further information, what is it? You got a thesis and an antithesis, but maybe out of that, I hope Julie will appreciate this, having background in Russian history. But anyway, maybe we'll have the perfect synthesis. Now, my question, Mr. Bernie and Mr. Jeff, if this is changed to general, what is it we're looking at? General business or limited business, Bernie?
General.
I think the petition says general business.
Okay, then Jeff and Bernie, what area does that change encompass? In other words, as I understand you guys, you're reminding me that to allow the proper zoning for this particular business, that we're opening up a wider area for sundry other activities.
My only point, Jim, was this. I just wanted to bring up the topic for the other plan commission members. We've got a petitioner that's not looking at marketing a piece of property as general business, that the whole table's laid out there. I think in a motion, because I didn't know if a motion was going to be made, how a motion was going to be made. My only point was that whoever would make a motion would be aware that if there's a condition they can put on it, that it's a general business for the grocery store convenience that's presented. There's been a lot of specific data that's been provided, and that's what we're looking at. I respect Larry's point that this is a flat rezone, but the mechanism to kick this back out and the rezone not come true, if it doesn't become a Dollar General store, then the rezone doesn't follow with the property. To me, that's a pretty simple condition that we can put with it, because I do think this is a good use. I think it's transitional between the highway. It leverages the infrastructure, and it's a very rural residential serving use, in my opinion.
So if we don't make the provision to which you allude, that would limit this, if we just change the zoning, and it would just affect this property that Dollar General is looking at, right? It's not going to change the zoning across Sample Road, or this is just that.
Larry, you can jump in, but yes, I believe that's the case.
Yeah, it would affect the surrounding businesses if an more intense use were, let's say Dollar General decided not to build and we've rezoned it to general business, and intensive use goes in, and the surrounding property could potentially not sustain the intensity of that use. So that being said, I'll go on to and recognize Ms. Thompson.
Thanks, Margaret. I just wanted to say, I do think that Dollar General can make sense here, especially if they're selling more than smokes and cokes, as Jeff said, and providing some fresh produce and real staples that people can utilize. I do have the same concerns regarding the broad general business designation that they're considering. And I mentioned to the petitioner many times in the past, petitioners have offered up limitations of uses related to a petition. But I feel in a lot of ways that this Dollar General will serve in similar ways to the gas station, that was there and went out of business. A lot of people stopped there for milk, ice, whatever. So I don't feel like it's that big of a change in a lot of ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McKim?
Yes, and just kind of following both up on all these comments. It seems like there are a couple of approaches here to addressing the concern about general business. One would be to simply restrict the use to grocery store. Now, is that, I guess that's my question to staff, is that A, something that's possible, and B, has that kind of restriction ever been used? Something that I know we've constrained uses, but to constrain it that much, is that something that's been done before? And that's a question to staff.
Jeff, I don't think that's ever been done before. There have been restrictions placed on rezones, generally by commitments of the landowner. But if you were going to put that drastic of a condition, you would really need to justify it with some findings that distinguished it from every other possible business use of that property from a land use perspective. In other words, the impacts you're trying to avoid, other uses that might be able to avoid those as well. So it would seem to be difficult to limit it to one particular business use and justify that.
Thank you. So and then I guess the other track that Bernie sort of alluded to, is it possible to have a zoning ordinance amendment, the rezone that would essentially revert if the current petition doesn't go through or something like that?
No, the only way you can change a zone is through the hearing process by the Plan Commission and an ordinance by the county commissioners.
You can't have a trigger in it in that.
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Well, I just, before moving on to Mr. Enright Randolph, I see two members of our staff have their hands raised, and I think they would like to address some of the questions that have been raised. Ms. Nestor Jellin and then Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, and Larry, chime in here, but I think I mentioned at one of the prior meetings that the use or proposal here is for over 10,000 square feet of building, which is why it's kicked into the general business. But the limited business would allow for, there's a convenience store with a 3,500 square foot cap. But I don't believe that's the petitioner's intent or interest. But I just wanted to bring that up if people were more comfortable with a limited business district instead of a general. That's a clear distinction. Larry, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think if you had any language limited to a Dollar General store, that I think it would be conclusive evidence that it's a spot zone for the benefit of the petitioner.
Yes.
I don't think you can get around that very easily.
Yes.
I think if, also one more thing, Margaret, if you know, this is something that the Plan Commission wants more information on, given the 37 plan or the statement that the petitioner's representative made about how sewer is not a requirement in the ordinance. I do think that there is a very strong correlation with all of our general business zones and the fact that they currently have access to sewer. So although it's not written in, it is a consideration because we are thinking about current infrastructure and ability to support a large business use or an intense business use.
Thank you very much. Mr. Enright Randolph?
Yes. Two things, I guess. Restricting it to such a one use, it almost seems like, would a use variance be an avenue for this and not a rezone? That's my first question. Then I have one other.
Well, I'll address that real quickly. We really try to discourage use variances because under Indiana law, you're only supposed to get a use variance if there really is no possible use for the property other than the use you're asking. You know, we have granted use variances in the past. It's kind of up to the Board of Zoning Appeals, but the state law says that if you can put a use on that property, such as a single family residence or a residential storage structure, you have a use. You don't necessarily need, you're not entitled to a use for some other use you may desire.
I guess that brings up Worms Way or.
Yeah, I mean, and
so
there,
I guess the real question, Larry, sorry for me to jump in. If they moved for a use variance, would that then kind of be the same consideration for spot zoning that you alluded to?
Well, they're basically two separate legal theories. One is relative variance. One of it is basically the statute and case law in relative to a variance, and the other is the case law in regard to what's called a legal spot zone. Again, I think it's really difficult to argue there's any occasion where a use variance is justified. In the case of Worms Way, I believe the BZA considered the fact that there was an existing building there that had been cut off by the interstate. And it would be very difficult to use that building for an ag RR use, if not impossible. So I think
so there's a lot of varying factors, but you know, some of what you said actually is directly related to this petition here. So, okay, thank you. I guess my follow-up question with the septics, because I do that I do agree with Jerry too, that we don't want to put too many hurdles to allow a good development. But also I do think that we really put a lot of emphasis that we want things hooked up to the sewer. So with that said, I'm curious if this doesn't necessarily get voted on today and we hear it again, I would be very curious of how many Dollar Generals are out there that are currently on septic, and maybe if we could get a bill of health. I don't know if that would be too burdensome or too much of a request, but I'd be kind of curious. And you know, you wouldn't have to give a precise number or anything, but you know, if there's, you know, a number of Dollar Generals that are hooked up to septic, and you know, you can tell us that they're still in good operational use. I think that's going to be helpful for some determination on this matter.
For that, Mr. Enright Randolph, it would be irrelevant because we're not, this consideration is not for just the Dollar General, it's for general business. So it's a really kind of an irrelevant question, if I might say, you know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's very relevant because they're talking about hooking up to septic, and I'm just generally curious. And if, you know, we want to entertain general business, it still gives us an idea of, you know, how well some of these businesses can operate hooked up on septic. So, I mean, it does give us insight. I do see your contrast between the two, and that's very welcoming, and thank you for that. But I do think more information gathered is only going to help us in our decision making here. And if they can show us that there are successful Dollar Generals that are hooked up on septic, I would like to know that. I'd also like to know if there's some failing out there as well, you know, but I doubt they're going to scour the world to give us that data. But, you know, thank you.
Thank you. Those are good questions. So if the petitioner can supply that information, we'd be most grateful. Mr. McKim?
Yes, has there been any discussion with the petitioner, or would the petitioner be open to making any voluntary restrictions on uses that otherwise would be applicable to the to general business? And I guess I don't know if that's a question for staff or for the petitioner or both.
So I'll let Jackie first weigh in on that.
I'm not sure if we've spoken with the petitioner about specific use restrictions, so I would think it would be relevant to hear from the petitioner's representatives.
And if the petitioner is here and would like to address that, or if you would prefer to meet in private with the members of the planning staff and come back to the Plan Commission, Mr. McDonough, if you're still there, or Mr. Kraft?
Yes, well, Will McDonough, I'm here still, and we'd be happy to grant any kind of restrictions to this property. I mean, you know, it's kind of the catch-22. We always try to be upfront with what we are presenting to the staff, to the Plan Commission, and also to the county commissioners or city commissioners. In this regard, county commissioners, we like to be upfront and say this is what, in particular, we are doing. I know there are other outfits that maybe are more generalized, but we are willing to restrict the property in what manner deems necessary by the staff or by the commission itself. And just to speak on the septic systems, we just in this past year, I believe we've done 5 Dollar Generals with septic systems. And over the last, I believe I've been doing this now for almost 14 years. We've done several, and I can't give you an exact number at this moment, but I don't know of any that are failing. Of course, not to be bold, but you know, the systems are designed by a professional engineer, stamped, and then also reviewed by the health department's staff, and they're engineers if they have them. Then, of course, you know, they're placed in the site by most of the time certified. It depends on the municipality or the health department, a certified installer. So I have no reservations on using septic in this instance. I hope I've answered all the questions, maybe too.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough. Thank you very much. Mr. Garitas?
Yeah, I'm not going to beat this dead horse, but a couple of comments, Mr. McDonough, that, you know, I understand where you're coming from with sharing the information as openly as you did. You know, that's a very positive attribute of the petition, because that's what got, I think, the Planning Commission thinking about how this could work for the surrounding area. But when you look at the general business tables and you see the uses, and that's why I wanted to bring up that question for my fellow commissioners, just to kind of point that out. If it were something a little bit more obscure as far as the number of uses in an area, it would probably zero in very quickly to a zone. But since it's general business, it's just an extensive list, and I just needed to ask the question to fulfill my obligations in reviewing the petition, understanding the comprehensive plan, and try to get the conversation going to discuss the what ifs, right? So, I mean, Jeff's question's right on. I'm not one to continue petitions at all. I want to keep them moving and get them out of the way and let staff move on to other things. But if you want to discuss with Mr. Kraft and yourself or your clients to work with staff to come up with some uses that would fit the area, you know, Mr. Schilling's very helpful explaining some of the yeses and nos that we're typically permitted to do. As is Larry, I think that might be in order, because I do think this is a good transitional use for the property, and I think it serves the area well. So if you're looking at coming up with some conditions, working with staff and put them in writing, then that would probably be another meeting, up or down, whatever, but it might work in your favor.
Okay. Mr. Pittsford.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. As I listened to this conversation, I had just a couple of really brief thoughts, so I won't belabor the point. One, when we discuss general business use, I think the site conditions may be more restrictive of general business than what we're really considering. You have to consider the physical environment when you consider the possibility of other uses. That's always a factor. And I also think an even more significant factor is what the market will bear. And I think when you look at this property, the use being proposed here, what Dollar General has in mind probably has the market in mind. I don't think they're as successful as they are across the United States without understanding their market. They're kind of like McDonald's. When I travel across the country, I don't see a whole lot of them boarded up. So, but if the petitioner is willing to put restrictions on here, I absolutely would be willing to hear that. Failing that, I don't have any problems with moving this forward, bearing in mind site conditions and the marketplace having its role in restricting the use here, regardless of what we put on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so do members of the Plan Commission have any other questions or comments? If not, we can entertain a motion.
Can we have the first page up so we can see the petition, please? Madam President, if I may, I'd like to make a motion.
Sure, Mr. Pittsford.
Thank you. In case number REZ-21-7, request from rezone from Ag RR to general business. This is a final hearing, and the property is located at 440 East Sample Road. It consists of 1.647 plus or minus acre parcel in Washington Township, Section 34. parcel number 53-02-34-200-0061-00-017. Owner Donald Richardson. I move approval of this petition for rezone from agro reserve condition to with any conditions appended by staff and any use restrictions petitioner is willing to offer at this time. That's my motion.
Second the motion.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. Mr. Wilson, if you would be so kind as to call the roll.
Yeah, I would like Dave's comment on the actual motion as far as whether it's precise enough as far as the conditions. Because I think if the staff comes up with conditions, we would need to bring them back to the Plan Commission for inclusion in the draft ordinance change. Dave, do you?
That's a good question, Larry, because I did leave open the possibility of restrictions put forward by the petitioner.
I would agree, Larry, that the Plan Commission needs to weigh in on the specific conditions.
Can we make a motion in this vein, or do we have to continue in order to do those things?
Well, if you're going to include conditions, I think you have to specify what those conditions would be, and you would need to continue it if you don't have those available.
Does staff have any conditions that we can immediately cite?
So, sorry to interrupt, but
no,
I believe there was one occasion where, not that long ago, where we just sort of bumped a petition to later in the agenda, and the petitioner offered some commitments. And we dealt with it a little later in the meeting. I don't know if our petitioner in this case might be willing to do that, but he does have one of them has their hand raised.
So in that vein, Mr. McDonough, would you please speak to us about your intentions?
Yes, and thank you for the continued consideration. Speaking with our client, there is no apprehension with us to restrict the conditions to, if you want to call it a grocery store use. Our intentions are 100% to do a Dollar General store. They carry a long-term lease, so that's fine with us. And if you want to make it as simple as just for grocery use, that's fine with us as well.
If I may, Madam President, I'd like to rescind my motion.
Yes, Mr. Pittsford.
And I'd like to make a new motion after Mr. Stainbrook withdraws his second, if he's so willing.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Pittsford, please.
In case number REZ-21-7, a parcel located at 444 East Sample, no, 440 East Sample Road in Washington Township, Section 34, owned by Donald M. Richardson. This is a request for a rezone from agro reserve to general business. I move approval based on the findings of fact and the petitioner's commitment to restrict the use in this general business zone only to grocery store use. Am I good there, David?
Jerry?
Yeah, Jim.
I don't want to rehash this thing about whether it's a grocery store or not, but really it is, as I understand it, and Mr. McDonough can speak to this, of course, but most of their space is taken up. Now, this is my experience, and you've had yours and Bernie and all of us, maybe all of us. Will would probably like to hear that we've all been in. But anyway, I would say most of their floor space is not groceries, not most of it. I'm willing to go along with it in dialogue here being called a grocery, but I'm afraid in the motion, I mean, this is not a grocery store. If they're only going to sell groceries, well, that's for them to decide. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Well, Well, Jim, in the grocery store use, there's a possibility for other items. Think about going to any other local grocery store. The entire square footage is not committed to just groceries. No. And that is by definition of use under this category. So I was referring to the use under the category of general business, which is grocery store. Okay. Well, if that works for Margaret, works for you, works for Bernie, works for Larry, works for Mr. Schilling. I don't want to be a stickler here.
It works for the petitioner. It works for the petitioner.
Pardon me, just a minute. Okay. Most of their floor space is not taken up by groceries. Thank you, Margaret. I'm sorry.
Well, we are, I would
be willing to entertain the motion by seconding the motion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, I would like just to clarify maybe the best approach with having commitments offered by the petitioner. Do we need that in written form?
Okay, so Mr. Schilling can answer that, but before we have Mr. McKidd and then Ms.
That's
Thompson.
really pertinent to this, because if it needs to be in written form, I would even vote no on my second until we have it in written form.
Yes.
And actually, I was just going to ask for Mr. Schilling's interpretation of this motion, or opinion on this motion too. So
what I was going to do as well.
Yeah, technically the commitments are supposed to be in writing and presented, and then they're supposed to be actually recorded before a decision is made. And if the decision is negative, then the commitments are of no effect. The recorded commitments would be of no effect. And I don't know if it would be helpful to get a written commitment for not only a grocery store, but something that would include other uses, other business uses that could be, or that fit the description of what Dollar General does. And I don't know if that would be hardware or a garden center or any. I don't know everything that they sell, but that's a possibility as well if you want to go that route. But in any event, the commitment should be written and recorded.
Well, the water's muddy. I withdraw my motion.
I was about to say,
I've got a motion, Margaret.
I'm going to withdraw my second.
Okay, Mr. Garitas.
Okay, in the matter of REZ-21-7, 440 East Sample Road, rezone from agro reserve to general business. This is the final hearing. I move that we continue this to the next Plan Commission hearing, regularly scheduled hearing date, in order for the petitioner to craft conditions that may simplify this conversation at that time.
I second.
Okay, the motion is on to continue REZ-21-7, the 440 East Sample Road rezone from AgRR to GB to the next meeting, which would be in February. Motion in favor is motion to continue this matter and continue the hearing until the February regular meeting of the Plan Commission. Jeff McKim?
Yes.
Jerry Pittsford?
Yes.
Jim Steinbrook?
Yes.
Amy Thompson?
Yes.
Margaret Clemens?
Yes.
Ryan Randolph?
Real briefly, I would recommend to the petitioner to maybe have something that is more strenuous with kind of how the discussion's going with, the one practical use, but think more broadly of where their true uses lie, and maybe have two different sets of commitments that the Plan Commission can entertain, because we're somewhat flexible as long as it's a practical use that is, desirable for that area. And with that, I say yes.
Hey, Bernie Garitas.
Yes.
The motion is approved by a 7-0 vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonough, for your patience and your indulgence, and we look forward to seeing you again in about a month, and Mr. Kraft as well. Thank you. You're muted, Mr. Kraft. I'm sorry, but
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. Well, we're not moving exactly quite along, but we are moving forward, and we're on to new business. And this is the item number 1 under new business, ZOA-21-9, amendment to the Monroe County Zoning Ordinance, Chapter 814, permits and certificates. This is the preliminary hearing, and there's been a request to waive the final hearing. And Mr. Wilson, if you are here, and I know you are, if you'd like to weigh in on this, I'd be most grateful.
Okay, these are basically all amendments to our improvement location chapter. The first one is to add a provision that requires an improvement location permit for making a change of use in any building structure or lot. This gives us the ability to review proposed change of use to make sure it meets all the development standards and use conditions in the ordinance. And the other change is to allow basically to clarify that you can make application for a land use certificate in the OpenGov website. And also that if requested, they must include an as-built certified by an engineer, surveyor, or architect. And site must include surveys taken on the detention basins, karst features, as well as property boundaries as applicable to the site. This gives the ability of the staff to view the plan, and actually has a basis where we go out and do that final inspection of being able to review what's been built, and also verify that the site was built according to the plans by the staking. Okay, this basically requires us to issue a land use certificate when a completed application is submitted within 5 days. And the last provision is one we've talked about quite extensively, and that's to allow us to issue a conditional land use certificate when everything's complete except for final landscaping for a period of 6 months, which may be renewed for an additional 6-month period at the administrator's discretion. This allows us, if somebody's finishing up a project in November, December, it's too late to put in the plantings, they could still have a land use certificate in open business as long as they completed the plantings in 6 months. The additional period is to allow for unseen circumstances such as a shortage of plantings or extremely adverse weather conditions that would prevent it for another 6 months. And I think that's all we have, isn't it, Jackie?
Yes.
And again, these are just sort of technical provisions that will make planning staff's job a little bit easier, but also will really provide a benefit for all the individuals that are doing projects because they will be able to get a temporary land use certificate, and we will be able to give a quicker response to requests for a land use certificate once we have the additional plans that are set forth in revisions.
And I'll just add, Larry, you had mentioned that we have to issue a land use certificate within 5 days. We're changing that to 10 days just to give us enough time. And in our current OpenGov processes, we are asking that stormwater and highway make inspections with us, just so that everyone can have final sign off. And this 10-day timeline gives us a little bit more breathing room to be able to sign off from all departments. So that's the change there.
I'm sorry, I misread it, and now I'm concerned I may be colorblind.
Oh, thank you. And Mr. Enright Randolph has his hand raised.
Yes, thanks for that clarification, Jackie. I was going to ask that, but then I guess my real concern is that we're actually using OpenGov name in this amendment. I really think we should steer away from that. I think we should be more general with like maybe our electronic permitting procedure. OpenGov is an outside service provider, and we don't know how long we might be within their services. I mean, we just launched it. No one gets scared because people know what I do behind the scenes, and I'm not asking let's reevaluate our OpenGov use, but I don't think it needs to be called out by name in this. I think it's just going to be more of a hindering of to have it in such detail versus more general that we could say electronic format or whatever you would wish. In the
if we change that to the on the within the county planning office or by utilizing the county online permitting website, would that satisfy you?
That sounds good to me because it may be called OpenGov today, and 2 years from now it might be called GovOpen or something like that. So the online permitting website, I think, makes sense. Don't you think so, Tron?
I think John's having some technical difficulties.
I see. Mr. McKim?
I just jumped on online permitting system. Yeah. Sorry, I'm having way too many difficulties here, but I jumped on my phone. I might just stay on it for audio. It looks like Mr. McKim was supporting the idea. I'm not sure where I got lost, so if anyone wants me to add or if my point got across, I'm fine.
Mr. McKim?
Yes, I was just saying online permitting system. Would that work?
Yes. Does anyone else have any questions or anything to contribute on this item?
Yeah, Margaret, my only question for staff is, does this take into account the language in the, and this probably goes directly to Jackie, that we've got in the site plan, plot plan language?
So Bernie, this would be the later step after a site plan. This would be once they're wanting to occupy after permits have been issued. And we are trying to make sure that if, automatically a lot of commercial sites already will have commercial site plans. And so as-builts should not be a long shot or a big ask for some of these. It will still be costly, but not as costly if it's from scratch. So we think that that's a reasonable consideration as well as the survey stakes. So we were kind of bouncing back and forth between the 815 changes and this to make sure they're consistent.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned about it's just the language. It references site plan. I don't see any language. I just don't want to see, okay, a single family residential house, after they get done building, do they require the land use certificate, or what is the permit that they get to allow them to move into their house?
So as of right now, we require land use certificates most certainly for commercial sites, and all properties that construct new buildings need to have certificate of occupancy from the building department. And a prerequisite of getting that occupancy is a land use certificate. But right now we have most typically issued land use certificates for commercial sites because of the additional improvements, such as possibly offsite improvements, landscaping, grading, things that aren't required on a single family site.
Okay, my only point I was trying to look at the consistency with is I don't want a single family residential homeowner who is only, or a petitioner who is only required to do a plot plan in order to get the permitting and get through the building process, to then all of a sudden at the end of the road have to submit a full site plan, which the definitions are different. So that's it. My concerns will handle it the way you think is necessary. Thanks, Jackie.
Okay. Bernie, would it be helpful if between numbers 2 and 3 on the screen, we said for commercial site plans, and then kind of entered in 3 and 4 that would be applicable just to the commercial? Okay, I can make that
That's
change.
great. Easier than what I was thinking it would be. Great work. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other comments or items of discussion on this? Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this? If so, please raise your hand or press *9 on your telephone. And Jackie, if you see anyone.
Yeah, I was going to say I have something in the chat, but I think that it's Mr. Lozelle, and he's here to speak.
Okay, so Mr. Lozelle is at the telephone ending in 4117. If you would press *6 on your telephone, we can hear you then. Thank you.
Yes, hello. My only question about that is because some of the wording was, I was just reading through it right there, and some of the wording is kind of funny and stuff on it. My question to you guys is what does that, now if you said on your residential don't have to have a permit, you just have like an occupancy permit if you're a brand new home, but what does that cover in the way of like new residents who want to build new buildings on their place? I mean, what do they have to do that? Are they having to apply for one of these permits? Is that what you're saying?
So right now for residential, we do building permit reviews at the planning office. And so what you're talking about, like an accessory structure, all structures would need that certificate of occupancy by the building department. And if there are additional constraints or conditions put on the property by an additional process that you needed to go through, such as a variance, there may be a need for a checkup or look at it by planning before that occupancy can be granted. But what we're talking about most certainly applies to commercial, and we are looking at as it applies to residential in the future, but right now it's typically applied to commercial.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure I was right. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lozelle, and thank you for coming tonight. We really appreciate your questions. Is there any other member of the public who would like to ask a question or to speak on this item? If so, please raise your hand or press *9 on your telephone. And if there's none, I bring it back to the Plan Commission for further discussion and then a motion. Okay, Mr. McKim.
Okay, I guess just as a matter of process, because we made some amendments here, do we need to wait for a clean copy at a future meeting, or could we move to approve with the amendments that were previously agreed to in this meeting or previously discussed in this meeting? It looked like you captured them, Jackie. I saw you flip the screen by that made it look like you had captured what had been suggested.
Yes, I think I did, but let me just read through, and then if Mr. Schilling wants to weigh in, we're going to change 814-3A to include located on the electronic permitting software website. And then between numbers 2 and 3, we are going to add for commercial sites, and then state that 3 and 4 are applicable only for commercial sites. So Mr. Schilling, can we make a motion to move forward with this text amendment if I propose 2 changes to it as it's shown in the packet, or do we need to continue it?
No, you can do that tonight.
Okay.
I just one comment. Weren't we looking at all the areas that actually said OpenGov website? I only see 2, but you only mentioned 1.
Sure. Yes, I'll replace all mentionings of OpenGov with online permitting software instead.
Thank you. So, Mr. McKim, do you wish to make a motion?
I do. In the matter of ZOA-21-9, I move that we make the text amendments as laid out in the packet to Chapter 814 permits and certificates, with the changes made in this meeting with respect to the naming of the OpenGov software and the clarification of which criteria apply only to commercial developments, and waive the final hearing.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll on ZOA-21-9, which is text amendments to the Monroe County zoning ordinance, Chapter 18, permits and certificates. The motion is to approve the amendments to the Chapter 814, including the amendments made at tonight's meeting in regard to the designation of the OpenGov permitting system to be online permitting, and the clarification that certain provisions only apply to commercial improvement location, commercial site plans. Now, again, it will be to waive the final hearing and send this on as amended to the commissioners with a favorable recommendation. Jerry Pittsford?
Yes.
Jim Stainbrook?
Yes.
Amy Thompson?
Yes.
Margaret Clement?
Yes.
Charlie Ryan Randolph?
Yes.
Bernie Garitas?
Yes.
Jeff McKim?
Yes.
The motion is approved by a 7-0 vote, and we'll go on to the commissioners for their consideration.
Thank you. We're moving on to item number 2 under new business, and that's ZOA-21-13, amendment to the Monroe County zoning ordinance, Chapter 802, zones and permitted uses. And this is the preliminary hearing with a waiver of final hearing requested. And this pertains to the amendment to add a scrap metal processing facility. So Mr. Wilson or Jackie?
I think Mr. Schilling and Mr. Wilson and myself, we can all kind of tag team this one a little bit.
Okay.
So I'll just quickly introduce, this is a text amendment to introduce scrap metal processing facility as a permitted use within the heavy industrial district under Chapter 802. We have proposed that it would be under the list of manufacturing, mining, construction, and industrial uses in the use table. And we've also proposed a definition, which would be including means an establishment having facilities for processing iron, steel, or non-ferrous metal, and whose principal product is scrap iron, steel, or scrap for sale for remelting purposes only, referencing the Indiana code. And then we're also referencing the Indiana code in that it does not include automotive salvage recycler, automotive scrapyard, Hulk crusher, mobile home salvaging facilities, vehicle disposal facility as defined, and that will reduce the concerns with vehicle disposal or processing. Then there's going to be a addition of condition 58, which does not currently exist in the table. The condition includes that it must be accessed by and served by road infrastructure sufficient to safely transport scrap metal by truck bed, trailer, or semi-trailer, and be sufficiently buffered by natural objects, plantings, fences, or other appropriate means so it's substantially screened from the main traveled way of the system. And then in regards to last meeting, there was a comment, and so we decided to add the item in red, and hopefully this addresses the comments, that the outdoor storage area be limited to 100,000 square feet or less and be located in an area that complies with the buildable area provision in Chapter 804-4. And Dave and Larry, if you want to add anything, feel free.
The only thing I would add is that there is a state statute and licensing process for scrap metal And one of the problems is there's also a statutory restriction that if a facility is proximate to a state highway or a federal highway, that the zoning ordinance has to be industrial. So you could not put a facility in mineral extraction zone. My analysis of it is this is kind of a missing portion of our zoning ordinance. These facilities serve a very useful function in recycling. This is basically what we would consider a metal recycling facility on a large scale. And so anybody who wants to get rid of scrap metal, they will have a proximate location to send it, to sell it and get rid of it. So it does encourage recycling, especially of large objects. It will not include any dismantling of auto parts, which is what typically makes up what's always been called a automobile junkyard. It's just strictly metal, which is sorted and then transported to a final disposal facility, such as a Nucor facility, where it's melted down and turned into new metal products.
Okay. Do any members of the Plan Commission have any questions or comments or items? Mr. Garitas?
I support this. My only question is with the area in red that was added on condition 58. And my math could be off, but I'm just wondering where the 100,000, if staff could further explain the 100,000 square feet, because the way I'm seeing that, that's only 2.3 acres or a footprint of less than 320 by 320 feet, which seems small, but if it's consistent with the rest of the ordinance, I understand where it came from. I'm just curious.
Bernie, when we looked at a proposal that's in front of us, the outdoor storage area that they had proposed was 100,000 square feet. And in looking at other areas, we think that, a lot of uses that we have don't involve a large, significantly large outdoor storage area unless they are an HI. But certainly if that addresses comments by Plan Commission members and makes them feel a little bit more like this use is amenable, we think it's a reasonable restriction. And again, it will accommodate something that we do have for consideration, but we're open to other numbers if the Plan Commission would like.
Okay, Mr. Stainbrook?
It seems to me that this is a place under conditions where this would work. But as an addendum to my comment, I'm going to submit a travel voucher to the County of Monroe because I've been driving all over, back and forth, up and down at 405 East Empire Road, and I couldn't find any place like this. So I think it must be on the west side over there by the water treatment plant and so on. So I finally got over there and examined the site in person, but I don't know how many miles I've driven and whether there's a provision for reimbursement for Plan Commission members. But thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Stainbrook. Okay, do any other members of the Plan Commission have any further comments or questions or further discussion? If not, I open it up to members of the public. And Mr. Lozelle, you have your hand raised. If you could press *6 to unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Okay, yeah, my only question was about that is how far is that going to be off the state highway? I mean, are you going to be able to see that from like the interstate, like 69 where it goes through, or where's that going to be located at?
Mr. Lozelle, we do have a rezone petition that is forthcoming, and if you're staying tuned, we'll be able to give you an example of a location that's hoping to utilize this use. But this at this moment is a text amendment proposal with some applicability to a future petition that we have on the agenda tonight, but it's just a general text amendment.
Well, there is some relevance to the question in that the state statute I was referring to earlier, it's actually part of the Highway Beautification Act that imposed restrictions on states in regard to receiving federal highway money. Part of the restrictions was not just billboards, but also scrap yards and automobile scrap yards. And part of that state statute prohibits a facility if it's visible from a state highway. So it's addressed at the state level. So I think that's one of the reasons we've added buffer provisions as well, because it has to be buffered from view from a state highway or an interstate.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Lizelle?
Yeah, the next question I had was on that. You said now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said there's going to be no vehicle scrapyard allowed there. I mean, they're not going to scrap no vehicles or nothing like that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So my question is there, without, since we already have two other places in town that do the scrap metal anyway, is there enough, is it valuable enough to have another scrapyard like it without doing the cars? I mean, is there going to be enough scrap metal going there to be valuable for that?
I can't answer that question, but I don't know if any other member of the staff can.
I think that question will likely come up on the next petition, or maybe could be answered by the.
Yes, this is a change to the ordinance, and then okay. Next we will hear a case that is specific to this ordinance.
Okay.
Okay. Does that, okay, thank you. And Mr. Enright Randolph and then Mr. Stainbrook.
Yes, thanks. I do think that question is way more appropriate for our next petition, but that's great foreshadowing for my concern. I'm very concerned that amendment, and then we have a request to rezone, and they kind of like are one and the same, and they're both on the same agenda. I just don't like the urgency, the rush of this. Also, you know, when we were looking at the trash transfer thing years back, there was a solid waste local policy where the solid waste board looks at this objectively. I don't see why we wouldn't have this type of provision in there as well. And then I think there was a great point brought up of like, you know, is there really going to be enough business generated? I think that we're not prepared quite yet to move this forward. And we do have a lot of say as a plan commission to make sure that this is ready. So I think we need to look at this. Like, are we wanting to be a hub for all adjacent areas for their recycling? Do we want to understand the growth and the scaling of this business? I think these need to be applied here through adding this new use. Like that you know, this business needs to submit a business outline of what their intended growth is. I mean, when I'm reviewing things that kind of catch me, they're not, you know, it's not a, you know, it doesn't quack and walk like a duck, but it's airy, it's close, it's similar. And solid waste needs to weigh in on this. I also think that we need to understand the growth and the scaling of this business. If we don't have these things ironed out, we might be looking back and be like, wow, how are they, you know, dealing with X amount of tons of recyclables? I mean, are we becoming a hub? And if we become a hub, we better have the best practices in place so we can lead by example across the state. Those are all questions. So when I reviewed something that was similar, it said geographic area. Now, their intended use was, I don't know, I can't be precise, but like a ton of waste. But when you look at their schematics for their layout for their facility, it said 1 ton to X amount of tons. I think it was like 3 to 4, where that one facility could manage that type of waste. And then there was a lot of studies at that time. And if you look, that's more waste than entire Monroe County. Now we are talking more of a trash transfer thing with those numbers and that understanding, but we don't have anything, any mechanism to understand how this growth is going to occur. And we're talking about adding this in to our ordinance as a use. And then Larry, you know, I commend you. You usually you shoot straight all the time, even if people disagree, and that's your job to, you know, just kind of shoot straight how you see it. And you're definitely going to have people push back. And my one pushback is you felt like this was a missing use in our ordinance. What about the truck stop travel plaza, where we don't even really have enough? We don't even really have an area in the county to facilitate that. How is that not a missing use in our ordinance? So I just kind of want to boil that down a little bit, Larry, just because I think there's a lot of missing uses in our ordinance. I think pulling out one particular missing use versus laying them all out is not necessarily, I think, the best way to be an advocate for this. If you just generally said, I support this, but I feel like there's a lot of missing uses in our ordinance. And this does address one. And like you said, like I said, please shoot straight and, you know, you're not going to irritate me. I adore you. And I adore your opinion. And, but I just, you know me, I just thought that was, I just wanted to push back a little on that, because I think there's a lot of things in our ordinance that are missing. And I also not too comfortable with moving this forward and then having a petition right behind it. And once we move from the Plan Commission, it's outside of our control. And you know, like, why wasn't that even brought to our attention that we already have other local policies that deal with waste, recyclables, and other things, like, and they go through our solid waste board to kind of get some type of recommendation. Why aren't we looking at that? Why? Because it caused an issue last time. But those were put in place to address my concerns that I have today.
Thank you, Mr. Enright Randolph.
Margaret,
I'm sorry, Mr. Steinbrook. I'm going to give Mr. Wilson and Jackie, Ms. Nestor,
you had recognized me, and I'm going to accept the privilege with your earlier call. I'd like to speak to the gentleman's concern. He can research some of this for himself. On page B3 of the Tuesday, January 4th, Wall Street Journal, it has an elaborate description of Steel Dynamics, one of the largest recycling and retooling to turn out steel in the nation, but particularly in the two or three state area, particularly Indiana, and also North Star, that's turning out steel. This product, and thinking of the gentleman again, and with his concern, I think it needed to be addressed, and fairly, since I was recognized after his comments. This is going to be processed and taken up I-69 to Indianapolis or north of that. And if you want to see the sites and where Steel Dynamics operate, I can't say, and I was reassured by legal, and I felt confident. That's one of the reasons I made my little speech, that this looks like an appropriate place and it will work. But I think Tron now also has gone on with the questions this gentleman raised, and the speed with which big money is being facilitated here. And it's not going to be a junkyard. Larry and Jackie have reassured us of that. But that doesn't mean they aren't going to bring auto parts in here. This is not a place where you're going to take your tea kettle and turn it in. This is big time, big business, and it makes sense to the company, the corporations, to have it situated on I-69. It's ideal for them. Now, Margaret, I'm going to apologize to you personally, but I think you were handling the order of recognition there. Thank you anyway.
Mr. Wilson and Ms. Nestor Jelen, would you care to comment?
Yeah, I want to address, first of all, that one of the problems, we actually took this facility that would be located on at the site that's pending on the rezone in the next agenda item. We took it through as a solid waste facility because we didn't have a more appropriate use designation in our ordinance. Item says this is not solid waste. It's not under our jurisdiction. The solid waste district said it's not solid waste, and the solid waste board said it's not solid waste, and it's not under our jurisdiction. So the approval at the solid waste facility doesn't fit. And now we've been legally challenged in regard to the conditional use that was granted for it by the BZ after it was approved by the commissioners. And this is a way of addressing a use that's not in our ordinance. It's not solid waste. It's not regulated solid waste. It's not defined as solid waste at the state level. It's not a solid waste transfer station. It's a metal recycling facility. And Jim is correct in that Indiana is a major, has major steel plants, including Steel Dynamics and Nucor, that purchases from around. And it's the raw product for these industries in Indiana that create a number of high jobs. And so that's how we came up with this. This is the definition we have is the state definition. It's regulated at the state level, requiring a license for a scrap metal processor. And this puts it only in the heavy industrial category. It has to be totally screened and buffered in order to be permitted in that category. And in regard to the missing uses, there may well be a number of missing uses in the ordinance. And as far as a truck stop, if you guys want to allow a truck stop in Ag RR on 2 acres, you can do that. You know, it's, you know, the original ordinance was approved by the Plan Commission and approved by the commissioners that limited a truck stop as a conditional use with very specific conditions to the heavy industrial area. That was intentional because they had no idea what the demand was going to be after the I-69 was completed, and they wanted to make sure that if a truck stop came in, it would meet requirements and not overburden local infrastructure, not overburden local streets, and not create a public nuisance or a magnet for crime. And those were the reasons why those provisions were put into the ordinance in regard to a truck stop. It can be changed. Any provision in our zoning ordinance can be changed by a recommendation from the Plan Commission to the commissioners that is approved. And again, if there are missing uses, those are things that should be suggested to staff. We will do our best to come up with a use and conditions that allow the use, but also protect surrounding landowners and assure that the necessary infrastructure is present to support the use. But again, there's no use that you can approve, can't recommend passage by the commissioners. The commissioners still have to pass it. So, you know, that's my response here. Again, this is a use that's missing, and it's a market system. And, you know, if you have 3 people buying scrap metal, that may provide a better market than 1 or 2 people providing scrap metal or buying scrap.
Yeah, just chime in, Larry, just to say that Tron's comment about not being able to control the size or scope of a business. Well, we don't, but the way that we review the size and scope changes of businesses is through our site plan amendments. So if they want to expand the facility, whether the outdoor storage area or the actual facility itself, then they would have to come back through for permits and site plan amendments. So it's not that we, don't check back in with businesses that are expanding, because typically that means they're physically expanding. So, but Tron, if you have other comments on how we could regulate or add conditions, I don't think a business plan is something that would be within the scope of planning and zoning, but if you have other ideas, maybe we could discuss those as well. Thanks.
I do not, and I just want to thank Larry for his clarification with the solid waste. I was not aware that this was not even within the realm of their consideration. I do appreciate it, and I do appreciate Larry kind of giving me his input. I value that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to ask a question. The remelting, the for sale or remelting, the remelting would not take place on site. Is that correct?
That's correct. That would be at the final disposal facility, but that's part of the definition because it's not designed to scrap out auto parts, for example, and resell the auto parts separately. Anything that comes in there has to go to melt and not for reuse.
Okay, and the melting would be done elsewhere?
Yeah, it would be done at the Still Dynamics or the Nucor facility, okay, as referenced by Jim.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there any are there any further questions or discussion? If not, I'd like to open it up to the public. If the public would like to ask questions or make a statement in favor or opposition to this proposal, would you please raise your hand or press *9 on your telephone? And if you see anyone, let me know. If not, we come back to members of the Plan Commission for a motion.
I can do that, Margaret.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. I'm sorry, he didn't raise, Mr. Lizelle has his hand raised. And I don't think I don't remember if I recognized him earlier. Are we done with public comment on this? I'd like to just recognize him since his hand is raised. Mr. Lizelle, if you press *6.
Yes, hello, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wasn't trying to make anybody mad, or I didn't mean to. I just wasn't trying to bring up a point, though. I just didn't know, with them not being able to scrap out, the charge stuff, I didn't know if there was enough metal valuable here for them for that facility like that with already 2 scrap yards in town.
Well, this is a separate, that would be under the next petition.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
sure, yeah,
thank you, Mr. Lizelle, and thank you for showing up tonight. And Mr. Sure. Garitas, if you're ready to make a motion.
In the matter of ZOA-21-13, this is an amendment to the Monroe County zoning ordinance. I move that we approve, that we forward this on to the Executive Board of County Commissioners with a positive recommendation with a waiver of the final hearing subject to or based on the findings of fact.
Second.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll on ZOA-21-13, a text amendment to the Monroe County zoning ordinance, Chapter 802, zones and permitted use, to add the new use of scrap metal yard. I don't have it. It's not showing on the screen, so bear with me. Together with a waiver of the preliminary hearing. Again,
waiver of final hearing, Larry.
Together with waiver of the final hearing. Again, this amendment adds the use of scrap metal processing facility and establishes conditions for the use through its definition. Again, a vote in favor is a vote to send a favorable recommendation on the text amendment to the commissioners. Jim Steinberg.
Larry, thank you. Larry, are we going to have discussion on this, or have we moved through that at Margaret's invitation? Larry?
I thought we were calling the roll.
Oh, okay. Well, you are apparently alert. I have another of Tron's concerns. I don't see why this has to be moved so quickly. This is big time stuff, and I don't have a problem with it, but I think there may be things. Well, I don't wish you ill, and Larry, you're going to be gone. Who knows? I may be gone too at my age, but I think something may come up about this. I just don't see. And I'm considering this then and hoping the chair will understand that I don't think we had discussion, but if I missed it, but I think Tron's right. This is moving too fast. I think I can go with Bernie's motion, certainly as seconded by Jeff, but I don't see why we have to waive the final hearing. I don't think it would hurt anything to have this come around again.
Well, Madam President, I call the question.
Yes, thank you. The motion has been made and seconded, and Mr. Wilson was calling the roll.
Well, then, point of order, Chairperson. We did not have discussion.
I'm sorry, we did. I'm sorry that you can't remember it. You actually participated in the discussion.
Okay, I give up.
Well, the motion has been made and seconded, and a question. I've called for the question, Madam President. Point of order.
Yes.
When we have a motion and second, we've called for a question. Let's proceed.
Yes, I agree.
Jim, should I put you down for a no? Is that
no? I, Larry, from the Navy.
Okay. Okay. Amy Thompson.
Yes.
Barb Clemens.
Yes.
Tron Ray Randolph.
Would you circle back? I don't want to waste anyone's time, but okay. I will make that.
Okay, Bernie Garitas.
Yes.
Jeff McKim.
Yes.
Jerry Pittsford.
Yes.
Tron Ray Randolph.
This is a decision for our executive leadership, and I think we can address other things when it comes to a site plan. And I will have faith in my colleagues and my executive leadership and vote yes, even though I have real concerns in this matter.
Okay, the motion is 7-0 to send this on to the commissioners with a favorable recommendation. Again, it's an amendment to the zoning ordinance text, and it's a legislative act by the commissioners who will make the final decision.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We're moving on to our item number 3, REZ-22-1, Bedford Recycling rezone from ME to HI, preliminary hearing, waiver of final hearing requested. And this involves a property at 405 East Dillman Road, and that is parcel number 53-08-32-300-009.001-008, and the owner is Bedford Recycling. Ms. Crecelius, if you would be so kind as to present this to us, I'd be most grateful.
Margaret, I'm going to cover this one as well. Ann and I kind of tag teamed it. So this is.
Pardon me, before you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stainbrook, you're out of order.
I'm sorry too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry too. You didn't read the issue of this question of this case. It's not at 405 East Dillman Road. It's west.
Okay.
So let's go back and correct the document before us, at least orally. It is not at 405 East. That was the big deal I made before. I rode up and down and back and forth. This is a basic mistake. It could be editorialized, but don't tell me I'm wrong by questioning the whole thing. This whole thing is wrong then when you've got the wrong address.
Okay, I will proceed ahead, Mr. Steinberg. I believe we have brought that up in the past, and we will look into getting that corrected. It is on the west side of the interstate, so we understand that it is confusing and it needs to be likely corrected, so we'll look into that. It did list the correct parcel number, And so I'll just walk through this petition. This is a rezone from mineral extraction to heavy industrial. The property is 30.45 acres. And this is a property that would be wanting to rezone to HI for the purposes of possibly applying for the scrap metal processing facility. So with that, I'll go ahead and show the location of the property. So it is on the west side of South State Road 37. The zoning here is mineral extraction, and they are wanting to rezone to heavy industrial, which you can see is adjoining this property, as well as agriculture, rural reserve, and institutional public. The site conditions are such that it was an old quarry site, so there is some man-made buildable area features. There's also some floodway considerations on the property. And then they also have access to CBU water, and they plan to utilize a commercial septic system in this case for this use. I'd like to move down to some of the site photos here. So the best way to view this property and most easy way to view this property is through aerial photography. But staff did visit the site and was able to take a look at the site conditions in terms of the roadways. So looking on south, you're facing on South Dillman Lane towards Dillman, and then also West Dillman Road here. We did not have a quorum for the plan review committee confirmed, so we did not take this to the plan review committee. And the overall site plan for this site, this is something that, as Larry mentioned before, has been reviewed, but is now coming back for the purposes of a rezone and to qualify if they are able to for the scrap metal processing facility. So this is the site here. They have a, sorry, this is a little bit blurry. I might be able to pull up one that is a little bit better, but this is the facility, the building, and then maintenance building, parking areas, detention is over here. And then they would have their outdoor storage area of 100,000 square feet towards the east side of the property. So with that, I can take any questions that you might have about this particular request.
So Mr. Enright Randolph.
I'm just kind of a little curious, just due to kind of the use being requested, and this would be more for Kelsey Petonia, our MS4 coordinator. Why did we not bring this to our drainage board?
Because I haven't received preliminary drainage plans yet for it.
Okay. Would that be like typical with us looking at this preliminary plan, or?
So this is just a rezone, Tron, and then they would have to actually file a site plan if the rezone did proceed and the text amendment was approved by the commissioners. But we're just showing the proposed site plan so that you have an idea of what the site might look like if it were to go through. But again, this is a rezone to heavy industrial. So considering that many uses do qualify to go in here if rezoned.
Yeah, and heavy industrial typically has pretty significant uses, and even I would even be curious of how the drainage board would weigh in. I mean, to have their input prior to the rezone could be significant in some of these requests. But let's not change the order of business. I just wanted to put that out there. And then I will kind of address Jim's concern. And I think it's just a very basic issue that the county is doing better at. On our parcel layer, it has 405 East Dillman, and on our address points, it has 405 West Dillman. So I think I might bring that to some people's attention and try to get that fixed behind the scene. But I just wanted to address that since I was looking into it.
Okay, Mr. McKim?
Yes, if you can go back to that, to the zoning diagram that shows all the neighboring areas and their zones. What is that little notch? That's that little triangular shaped notch there that would be totally surrounded then by heavy industrial and the wastewater treatment plant. What's it actually being used as right now?
This is being used, I believe, as a stone cutting location. They do limestone cuts for sale.
Okay.
I can look up the exact business name.
It's not a residence.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, Margaret, I didn't mean to, sorry, I'll raise my hand.
That's okay. Mr. Steinberg had his hand raised, and then I'll go to Mr. Garitas.
Well, thank you, Margaret. I just wanted to follow up with Tron's question. And I surely don't want Tron this to sound condescending. I don't mean that at all, but I want to make sure. Tron, you know then this is what we just acted on. This metal metal processing. This metal processing where we did the rezone. We're talking about the same thing here now. And this was my concern that you help me with, that I didn't think we had to do it too quickly. If this has a no final hearing, I think that would be a mistake. But I'm sorry, Jackie. So if Tron and I are together on this, we seem to have a similar concern. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jackie, or whatever.
Okay,
Madam President, I do want to agree. We do have a similar concern. I want to substantiate that.
Yes, you both made that clear, both in the prior change to the ordinance and now in this case. But Mr. Garitas had his hand raised, but he's taken down his hand. So do any other members of the Plan Commission have questions, or is there any further discussion? If not, I'd like to open it up to the public. Are there, Mr. Pittsburgh, you had just spoken, so I thought that was from before. So Mr. Enright Randolph and then Mr. Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I guess I'm very curious if anyone else would like to have some, feedback from our drainage board and other things like that. Not in this particular case, it's kind of one-off. I hate to be subjective to like new cases being presented, but like in the future, I think we should be looking at some of these larger rezones more in depth and utilizing our experts that we have that serve on some like the drainage board. I would really want to understand their concerns and then use that in my decision making if I would want to support this request. And I just wanted to make that last comment, but I'm not asking for us to kind of amend the typical order of business, but I'm very curious of what my colleagues think.
Thank you. Mr. Pittsford.
Thank you, Madam President. I just was curious because this is zoned mineral extraction, to what extent this petition would interfere with current mineral extraction in the area, and is it still actively generating blocks through mineral extraction, dimensional mill blocks, et cetera?
So I'll go ahead and zoom out so that you can see the other mineral extraction areas in this township. From what we've heard from the petitioner and their representatives in the prior request, they stated that this is a no longer in use quarry site. So if the petitioner's representative is on and would like to address that, they could at a later time.
So is it safe to say this is a played out quarry site?
I believe so, but I would like them to confirm.
Okay, and it does not interfere with any currently active mineral extraction operations in that area, which would also be addressed, I suppose, by petitioner, but I do want that addressed.
Okay, well, it is time to hear from the petitioner, the petitioner's representative. If you are here, can they unmute their microphone? Is that Mr. Ziepold?
Good evening, Mr. Ziepold.
Yes.
So I am a lawyer for Malagrodner in Bloomington, and we represent Bedford Recycling. Unfortunately, Mr. Larry Parsons, who is the head of Bedford Recycling, is traveling out of state, cannot be here tonight. And he would be the best person to answer some of these questions. In that vein, and to address some of the other concerns that have been voiced by the commission, the petitioner has no objection to continuing this for a final hearing on another date. That would be just fine. My understanding of the state of the property is that the mineral extraction is complete. There are leftover mounds of dirt and gravel. The petitioner, Bedford Recycling, intends to grade it and use the graded surface to put in its facility. That's the hope. I'm happy to answer any questions in the limited scope that I can. But I wanted to identify myself as a representative of the petitioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ziepold. We appreciate that. Do members of the commission have questions for Mr. Ziepold? Mr. Stainbrook?
Yes, thank you again, Margaret. Mr. Ziepold, you also have a operation in Mitchell as well as in Bedford. Is that correct?
Sir, I know that we have one in Bedford, and I'm sorry, I don't work with this client a lot, at least not yet. I don't know whether there is one in Mitchell.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, are there further questions? If not, we'll go to the public. And if the public has any comment in favor or opposed, please raise your hand or press *9 on your telephone. Okay, Mr. Lazelle, if you would unmute yourself.
Yeah, my only question was, is there any site plans for the drainage or anything that anybody could see?
Mr. Lazelle, in the Plan Commission packet, there is an example site plan that shows that the detention in this case would be to the west of the facility of the building in the parking area. I'm using my cursor to show you this stormwater detention area that they're proposing.
Okay, I see. Yeah. But did you say there's a man-made car story on that property now, you said?
The petitioner's representative stated that there is leftover areas where there were cars extracted and piled on the site.
Oh, there's no like big water feature or nothing.
Oh, you mean like sinkhole conservancy areas?
Right, yeah, correct, yes.
Okay, this is an illustrative site plan, so this isn't one that's actually been something that we would consider high enough level to actually issue permits. So when they do a full topographic survey and show the grading, they will have to identify sinkhole conservancy areas, and they will have to meet those restrictions for setbacks on the site.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lazelle. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak about this case? If so, please raise your hand or press *9. Okay, we come back to members of the commission for further discussion. Mr. Enright Randolph.
I hope everyone knew that I was going to be really active in this discussion. I did support the amendment, so I think, I would really be curious, more broadly of how much, these uses are practical in this area. We all know that we put the industrial in very interesting topography of our county because it wasn't desirable to build. Turns out those were some of our most sensitive areas when it comes to stormwater and our critical drainage areas. I do want to indicate that I'm looking at the wetlands NWI off of Indiana map, and right in the middle, the same area that you were circling is actually coming up as a wetland of the USFWS. So I'm not sure if we have to be very precautious about, you know, if that is an area that could even be developed. So I'm going to point that one out. And we have some flow lines there too, some streams. So let's just make sure we look into that a little bit. And more broadly, I mean, I'm really curious if, you know, we look at this area in the same lenses that we can look at it now. And if these uses are really practical. I mean, what I'm seeing is I don't see any density of karst features on my map, which is nice, which means there's probably no, I can't speak to it, you know, I'm not doing a geotech, but we got a lot of aquifers too. So, you know, like, and this has been dug into. So I would imagine there's some man-made conduits that feed into it. Again, I'm not actually, this is all not necessarily speculation, but this is just, you know, my opinion of what we could encounter. So, and we're talking about storing a bunch of scrap metal on there. What, 1,000 feet of permitted storage in open area? Is that correct? And so I'm curious of what the facility is going to do. And we all know that, you know, this might not be solid waste, but there's going to be byproduct. So again, if we're moving forward to allow this particular use, and we don't have any provisions of, like, you know, exactly what area we're going to be serving or necessarily the scaling of the operation, we should make sure that we're looking at this very subjectively and make sure that if we become a recycling hub for, you know, a large area of the more southern part of the state, we should make sure that we are asking for some of the best practices out there, and we are leading by example and condoning a use that, you know, that it is really going to not have any adverse impact. We all know of what this community has experienced in the past, and I'm not saying anything bad about the petitioner, and I don't necessarily think I'm not going to support this, but I do like that they're amenable to moving it to the final hearing. And I really do think maybe we should send these more to the drainage board when we're looking at this type of rezone request. Not all rezone requests, but this is pretty significant. I mean, we just had to amend our ordinance to allow the use. So that's the extent of my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Enright Randolph. Mr. Pittsford.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I just would, I would like to see if we could get an image that shows both the wastewater treatment facility that derives its access from this road and the designated septic area on the subject property. Can we get something close to that? I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just anything. Yeah, that may work. Can we, right, and then you can point out where the approved septic is, because I did note that there is an approved septic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if there's an accepted septic there, it's just immediately south of the retainage pond, right, or detention pond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's proposed down here.
Right. So it's in the same general area. So we're going to have to assume that some soil study has been done there. And then if we consider right across the road from this is a significant wastewater treatment facility, where does the effluent from that wastewater treatment facility flow? Does it flow in the same direction that the water from this retention pond would flow? Those are my questions.
So,
and my point, in case it's been obscured, is that there's effluent right across the street that has to be managed. This is not going to generate any more water than it does, and there is an approved septic on the property. So some soil study has been done adjacent to the area where the retention pond will be. It's been determined that it's suitable for containing wastewater without it flowing in an adverse way.
Thank you, Mr. Pittsford. Okay, Mr. Stainbrook.
Well, Bernie may know better than some of the others, but I'm assuming, Jerry, that it goes into Clear Creek. That's, you know, Clear Creek's been, I don't know just what the contamination status is now, but I don't think you're supposed to eat the fish. You're not supposed to swim. That's my latest and personal. We ride the horses down Clear Creek with some trepidation, but well, I guess that's it. I'm guessing that it affects Clear Creek. Now, whether you want to think about this, I suppose the experts in the field, as far as engineering, Bernie for that matter, as a member, and then the professional staff, the water people concerned with the water. But I think the final thing, and Margaret, I think now probably we're drawing to a close. I know you must hope so. I hope so also. So I'm going to refrain from anything, no matter how much I think I know or how much I object. I'm done, absolutely. But if that gentleman that was with us or anyone else on the Plan Commission, I respect council's reservation, not knowing about Mitchell, but you don't have to go to Mitchell. If you want to see this in operation, the same corporation or company, go down to Bedford. It's there. Look at it on the northeast side of Bedford, if you do have a question. Thank you, Margaret. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Mr. Garitas?
Very quickly, thanks, Margaret. In the staff report, Jackie, one note you might add under right above the 109 where it says in addition there's one condition, and that's 58. This doesn't have the extended language for the 100,000 square feet that we saw in the other petition. So just a friendly point out. That's it.
Thank you. I'll add that.
Okay. Well, is there a motion, or shall we just leave this to the next hearing?
Leave it where it is, please.
And if that's the consensus, then we will not have a motion. And I'll wait for just a second to see. And okay, so we have reports from planning and the county legal. So Mr. Wilson?
The only thing I will add is that the source of the error on the address is basically a misaddressing within the GIS system. And this will give us an opportunity to re-advertise with the correct address, even though if you put the address that we listed into the Elevate system, it would take you to this site, but it is wrong within the Elevate system. We'll need to correct that, and we can re-advertise it at the correct address. That will make sure that everybody's gotten proper notice in regard to this rezone petition. And that was a good catch on Jim's part, that it was an error.
Jackie or Larry, just send that over to Jared Eichmiller, our GIS coordinator. He'll coordinate with the auditor's office and we'll get that corrected next time. And Elevate pulls that data nightly. So as soon as we get that, we'll probably have that fixed within a matter of moments.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay. And Mr. Schilling, do you have any reports from County Legal?
No reports, but I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Mr. Garitas?
This isn't a question. I'm going to keep it going, but I've got two comments. One, to follow up on Larry's address note to Jim. Jim was correct in what he was saying. I can think of 3 petitions that had issues over the years that I was involved in that the address and it was an issue. So again, I compliment Jim and his aggressive tenor on getting the point across. The second point was, before the meeting ended, I just wanted to make an observation of something Tron said earlier about the stink bug impression that Monroe County and the city of Bloomington may have had at one time, or with NDOT. And I don't have any personal knowledge of that. I just know that that was a perception. But I just have to compliment the Monroe County Highway Department that that team that we've got there, and it of course started with Bill Williams and all the work he did, but they have been very successful on getting funding, working with the state. I can think of several instances. One that's most recent was actually a crossing that they're working on across one of our railroad tracks, and they have been absolutely tenacious and hardworking on accomplishing that with significant state funding. So they've done a great job, and I understand what Tron's point was, and I just wanted to compliment the highway department that if there was a corner to turn, they have done so.
And on that note, I have something to add because I am the delegate to the MPO, and it's not within DOT that where the issues lie. I think the coordination between the county and the city and the other organizations internally make it very difficult for a good and smooth cooperation with NDOT. And that's been ongoing and very well noted and very well documented, that we shoot ourselves in the foot a little too often. And it's the coordination. The purpose of the MPO is to coordinate across all of the different entities. And right now, the staff at under the direction of the MPO doesn't seem to be that responsive to the MPO. And it's been a problem at coordinating, for instance, around the new hospital site. And that's been an aggravation for 4 or 5 years. NDOT is willing, but locally we're having some problems. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Second. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.